You know, for 200 years, the nation of Chile has been in this constant struggle with itself, trying to write, then rewrite, and then perfect its own rulebook. This whole story is about a country's search for its identity, and we can see it all play out in its single most important document, its constitution.
So let's think about it this way. A country's constitution is basically its operating system, right? It sets the fundamental rules for, well, everything. So what happens when a nation keeps trying to hit the reset button on its own source code over and over again? To find out, we're going to trace Chile's absolutely incredible constitutional journey.
All right, first up, the nation's operating system. We're going to be charting a 200-year-long quest.
This story really unfolds across 4 massive turning points. It all kicks off back in the 1810s, with those first shaky attempts at self-rule. Then comes 1833, a constitution that tried to create order, and it actually lasted for almost a century. But that stability, it gets completely shattered in 1980 by what you could call a great rupture. And all of that leads us right up to 2019, when this huge social explosion sparked a brand new quest for a full rewrite.
So let's dive into that first chapter, the first republics. Way back in the beginning, the problem was pretty clear. How do you break free from colonial rule and, actually forge an entirely new nation from scratch? To really get a feel for the mood back then, you just have to listen to the language from one of the early manifestos. It's asking, really poetically, since when must a crippled man serve his own crutches? It's this powerful accusation. It's basically saying that Spain, which should have been like a mother to them, had become destructive instead. This wasn't just some political disagreement, it was a fiery, emotional, total rejection of the old world.
And you can literally see this evolution happening in the documents themselves. The first real shot, in 1822, was a little loose. It was run by a supreme director and these local councils called cabildos. But just a decade later, the 1833 Constitution comes along and locks in a much more centralized system. It declares that sovereignty, the ultimate power, belongs to the nation itself. And that was a huge, huge step in building a single unified country out of a former colony.
Okay, now for part 3, the 1980 turning point. After nearly a century of that relative stability, a political earthquake just hits. In 1980, under military rule, Chile doesn't just tweak its constitution, it gets a full-on system reboot.
This new rulebook, it laid out a totally different vision for the state. It defined new rights, like the right to a pollution-free environment, and put new duties on the government. It guaranteed the right to choose between public or private options for things like health and education, and it formally defined the military's role as being obedient and non-political. This was a brand new blueprint for Chilean society.
And just look at how the power of the president changed. In the old 1833 system, the president could influence Congress, had some oversight on judges. But the 1980 reboot? It supercharged the office with powerful new tools, the ability to call a national vote, to declare states of emergency, and to hire and fire ministers basically at will. The whole center of gravity in the political system, it had shifted. Now, part 4, decades of reform. See, this new operating system, it was never really considered finished. Instead, it was just endlessly patched.
To really see what this patching looks like in practice, let's just take one example, Article 32. This is the part that defines the president's powers. When it was first written back in 1980, it was pretty clean, pretty simple.
Okay, now look at that exact same article today. Wow. It is a Frankenstein's monster of legal patches and amendments, just bolted on over decades of democratic rule. I mean, you don't even need to read the words. You can just see the history of constant change. This wasn't some stable, set-in-stone document. It was a permanent work in progress.
And in total, we are talking more than 35 major reforms since democracy returned. The pressure to change it, to adapt it, to fix this foundational text, it has been absolutely relentless.
Which brings us to our final part, the quest for a new pact. By 2019, the demand for just another patch wasn't going to cut it. People wanted a full reboot. But this time, the reboot failed.
At first, the path forward seemed really clear. Step 1, a national vote gives the green light for a full rewrite. Step 2, they elect a couple of different bodies to actually draft the new text. They even set up formal ways for everyday citizens to participate. But then, Then came the final step. And in 2 separate attempts, the people of Chile voted no.
The numbers here tell a really fascinating story of political whiplash. I mean, look at that first bar. Overwhelming support to start from scratch. But then, when Chileans actually saw the first draft, they rejected it by a huge margin. So they try again with a totally different group, and they rejected that draft too. That massive consensus for change had just completely evaporated. It turned into a consensus to stay put.
So here is the incredible twist in the story. After years of protests, intense debate, and 2 massive national projects to write a new constitution, Chile ended up right back where it started. The country is still being run by that 1980 constitution, with all of its many patches and fixes. The big reboot? It failed. Twice.
Which leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. We usually think of constitutions as being this fixed, foundational bedrock, right? But what if, for some countries, the foundation is the constant active revision? What if Chile's true national identity isn't written down in any single document, but is actually found in that 200-year-long, unfinished, and ongoing search for the perfect words?